There's something quite uncomfortable about this particular experience because it doesn't announce itself in any obvious way. Nothing is breaking down, nothing is falling apart in your life, and on paper things are still working. You're still functioning at a high level, still getting things done, still moving forward in a way that would generally be described as successful. And yet internally there can be this strange sense of emptiness. It's not sadness exactly, not burnout in the traditional sense, more like a lack of emotional contact with what you've built or what you're building, almost as if you're observing your life rather than fully living it. And what makes this particularly difficult to talk about is that it doesn't come with a clear explanation. There isn't a single event that caused it, there isn't an obvious mistake. It just gradually becomes part of the experience. Now, I want to slow down a little bit because there's a reason this happens that most people never really explore. And it's not about mindset, it's not about gratitude, it's not about trying to appreciate what you have more. It's something more structural, something to do with how your system has adapted over time. Because when you've spent a long time operating under pressure, responsibility, or high demand, your system learns a very specific way of functioning. It learns how to prioritize stability over experience, efficiency over presence, and control over spontaneity. And again, that's not a mistake, that's an adaptation. It's what allows things to stay organized when there's a lot to hold. But over time, something subtle starts to shift. Because when your system is primarily focused on managing life, it has less capacity to fully experience it at the same time. So even when something good happens, there can be a slight distance from it. Not because you don't care, but because part of you is still in management mode. You're still monitoring, still adjusting, still holding things in place. And that part doesn't fully switch off just because the moment is safe. Now, here's where it gets quite interesting, because you can have everything externally aligned and still feel internally disconnected from it. And that disconnect is often confusing because you start looking for a reason, something that explains it. You might assume you've just become desensitized, or that you need something new to aim for, or that you've simply lost motivation. But those explanations rarely go deep enough, because what's actually happening is more to do with how your nervous system is organizing attention. In high responsibility states, attention narrows. It becomes task focused, outcome focused, forward focused, which is very useful when things need to be managed, but it comes at a cost. Because the more time you spend in that mode, the less time your system spends in open, receptive experiences. And over time, that can create a kind of internal flattening where even meaningful moments don't fully register. They pass through you rather than land in you. And that's often where this emptiness shows up, not as a dramatic absence, but as a lack of felt connection to what's already there. Now, there's a second layer here that's worth being honest about, because sometimes this doesn't just feel like emptiness. It can feel like restlessness at the same time, a sense that something is still unresolved, even when nothing obvious is wrong. And that combination is particularly unsettling, because it makes it difficult to know what to do with it. Do you slow down? Do you push forward? Do you change direction? And none of those options quite resolve it fully, because the issue isn't direction, it's access. Access to a different internal state, one where experiences are actually being received, not just managed. Now, what's important here is that this doesn't mean that something is broken. It means something is still operating in the background that was designed for a different phase of life, a phase where maintaining control, direction, and stability was essential. But if that system never fully relaxes, you end up in a situation where life continues to improve externally, but your internal experience doesn't update at the same pace. And that mismatch is where the emptiness begins to make sense. Now, I want to leave something open here because there's a reason I'm not rushing to resolve this in the same way that most explanations try to. And it's because the moment you try to solve this too quickly, you usually end up reinforcing the same system that created it with more analysis, more adjustment, more internal management, which can actually deepen the distance from experiences rather than reduce it. So instead, it's worth noticing something quite simple. How often are you actually in experiences versus managing them? And if you sit with that question properly, something begins to become a lot clearer, and not as an idea, but as a felt distinction. Because that distinction is usually where the shift begins, not in changing your life, but in changing how much of it you're actually present for. Now, in the next video, I want to go into something slightly more confronting, which is how this sense of emptiness can sometimes be tied to the identity you've built to achieve everything in the first place, and why letting go of that identity isn't as simple as it sounds. If you want a more detailed breakdown of why this sense of emptiness appears even when everything is working, and how to start shifting it at the root level, click the link underneath this video. That's where I go deeper into this to explain how to work with the system directly rather than trying to fix the surface.